Well, greetings from Ellensburg. It's a windy afternoon. It's a little later in the day than I usually do these. Sun's not quite at my optimal angle, but we gotta do what we gotta do. We're down to our last two lectures. This is the penultimate or second to last lecture of our class. We might run a little bit long on this one because we have our job for these last two lectures is really to put a lot of different pieces together. We're going to draw on knowledge that we've gathered from little bits and pieces here and there throughout the course of the class to put together a pretty big story. Exotic terrains. That's the title of this one. And usually somebody pipes up, says, "Mr. Drummond, I think you misspelled terrain." It's not terrain like the shape of the ground, like we usually use the word in geology. The word terrain is a big block of land. Terrain is a big block of land. What's so exotic about it, man? That sounds like fruity drinks and stuff? Umbrellas sticking out of them? No. Exotic, when we talk geology, exotic just means that it came from somewhere else. So we've got exotic terrains, big blocks of land that came from somewhere else. Let's go. This discussion is going to take us to a few different places. We're going to talk about the Rocky Mountains. We're going to the hero of the end of our story at the end of our class, the Farallon Plate, is going to come back and figure prominently. We're going to talk a little bit about some stuff in the Cascade Mountains, and then tomorrow for me, I'm not sure when you're going to watch it, our final lecture, we're really going to put all of the pieces together about the west coast of North America, and we're going to hopefully make some connections that might surprise you, and you'll see how this stuff fits together in a really cool way. I'm trying to save a big aha moment for the very end. I want you to walk away from this thing going, whoa! And so I'm gonna try to do this in such a way that I don't give away too much before the end of our final lecture tomorrow. So we're going to start today. With a place called Mount Stuart. Mount Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, not S-T-E-W-A-R-T. You don't care. It doesn't matter. Mount Stuart, if you have ever driven to Seattle, to Western Washington, over Snoqualmie Pass, as you're driving west on Interstate 90, you drive over a series of glacial moraines as you approach as Snoqualmie Pass. We talked about that, it seems like ages ago. There's a diagram somewhere in your yellow book about that. Hang on, I'll even tell you what page number it is. There's a diagram. It is way back on page, good Lord, how far back is it? Page 14. Page 14, remember this one? That series of glacial moraines? Well, as you drive up over Indian John Hill, as you're coming down Indian John Hill into that lowland between that and the, it's not called the Suncadia Moraine, but it's where Suncadia Golf Course is and stuff by Roslyn and Easton, Cleellum, there we go. As you're driving through westward, what the hell am I talking about? Westward through that land, if you look up on the horizon, there's a striking, stunning, beautiful mountain range. If you've already done the Monastash Ridge virtual lab that I just put out couple days ago. We start with that in the background, the Stewart Mountain Range in the background. It's really majestic. It's beautiful. In the winter and spring, it's capped by snow. Beautiful mountains. And so here's the first message about the Stewart Range. You can Google that. Help. You know, for these last couple lectures, I might even go above and beyond on my so-called video production and sneak a couple of images in so you can really see what I'm talking about. Mount Stewart is it is a mountain, but it's actually a series of mountains. And for pretty much everybody's purpose, except for ours, the Stewart Range is part of the Cascade Range. If you're a bird watcher and you want to go to the Cascade Mountains, you can go see Cascade Mountain birds at the Stewart Range. Or if you're into wildflowers or climbing, if you're into mountain climbing, there's a great climbing and hiking out there. And everybody says, yeah, Stewart's part of the Cascades. And for everybody it is, except for us, because we're geologists. And here's the first message. Geologically speaking, Mount Stewart has nothing at all to do with the Cascade volcanoes. Well, how do we know that? Well, any geologist, the very first thing they're going to do is what? Look at the rocks. Right, let's go to Mount Stewart. Let's look at the rocks. What is it? It's a batholith. It's a granite batholith. I told you about a batholith a while back. It's granite. What does that mean? Felsic magma, high silica, cooled slowly underground. Big crystals, never erupted. We're familiar with granite. Where else can we find granite? Sierra Nevadas, granodiorite. So, oh hey, how about our ghost volcanoes in Washington? We've got granodiorite cores of these ancient ghost volcanoes. Volcanoes gone, we've got the magma chamber left over, right? So, Mount Stewart, great, another granite, another ghost volcano of the Cascades, right? It's not. And how do we know that? Well, the way that we know that is by looking at the age of the Mount Stewart granite. And if we look at the age of the Mount Stewart granite, we know exactly when that lava rock crystallized, when that magma crystallized, I should say, when it cooled. And it was 93 million years ago. 93. Do you see why that doesn't fit with our Cascade volcanoes story? When did the Cascade, what's our time frame for the Cascade volcanoes? You remember? 40 million years ago is when the Cascade volcano story started. It's still going on right now. It's going to go on for another 10 million years until we're all out of Juan de Fuca plate. Once we finish crossing the rest of the Juan de Fuca plate, we'll dry up those ones too. And there will be no more Cascade volcanoes. But for now, we've got a 40 million year long Cascade volcano story. And we got this big old chunk of granite sticking up out of the middle of it that's 93 million years old. Well, what's going on there? For years and years, this really confused people. It still really confuses people. Geologists are still working on this today. But here, let me make it a little bit more confusing for you, and then we'll try to start solving it. If I go hiking at Mount Stewart, if I climb Mount Stewart to the peak of Mount Stewart, I'm standing on 93 million year old granite. It's beautiful granite. And if I walk down the south slope of Mount Stewart, I'm walking towards Ellensburg. This mountain is to the northwest of Ellensburg. So I'm trying to walk home. I'm taking the most direct route possible. I'm walking down to the south, into the foothills, not up on the top of the mountain anymore. I'm down in the foothills, right? You got a big mountain, then you got little hills leading up to the big mountain. Well, I walk down into the foothills, and I'm standing on granite, and I take a couple of steps, and all of a sudden I'm not standing on granite anymore. Now I'm standing on a rock called serpentinite. Serpentinite. Serpent is the root of that word. Why is it called serpentinite? Well, it's this really smooth, almost slippery rock. It's kind of greenish. Slippery and green. That's probably where the serpent comes from. Anyways, that part doesn't matter. The part that matters is that serpentinite is 150 million years old. Turn around, take 2 steps back, I'm standing on granite. I'm standing on 93 million year old granite. What? Turn around, 2 more steps, 150 million year old serpentinite. Nothing gradual. There's 60 million years between these two. What's going on here? I don't know. I'm confused. So I walk back up, and instead of walking towards Elmsburg, I walk towards Wenatchee. I walk east towards Wenatchee off of Mount Stewart. I'm walking down, I'm walking through the foothills. 93 million year old granite. Couple steps later, I'm in 100 million year old biotite gneiss. Got granite. All of a sudden I'm in highly metamorphosed rock. 7 million years difference. What's going on there? That is the question. And it's not just a question of what's happening in the North Cascades. It's not just a question of what's happening at Mount Stewart. Because I could go 500 miles north to British Columbia in Canada. I could go all the way south to Mexico. And here's the first part of the big story. Is that all along the west coast of North America, the western margin of North America, all along we have a hodgepodge of confusing, weird geology that doesn't fit nicely with our story that we've told. All of the old bedrock stretching all up and down the coast is a mixture of chunks of different stuff from different places that all somehow ended up stuck to the west coast of North America. The only page from our yellow book that we really need today is 45. It probably won't translate too well when I hold it up. 45 is a map. Well, you can see what it's a map of. We got Alaska, Canada, Washington, Oregon, Cali, Utah, Arizona, Mexico. It's that whole West Coast picture. And unfortunately, it's in black and white. Maybe one of these years I'll move up in the world and afford some color copies for my course books and put a color-coded picture in there. But what this is trying to show is that there are countless little blobs of land, terranes, that have smashed on to the edge of North America and all of Western North America is a confusing hodgepodge. So we'll come back to Washington, and we're going to finish in Washington tomorrow. Next time. We're going to finish in Washington. But we're going to leave Mount Stewart hanging as a mystery for a little bit. I mean, you've probably already put the pieces together, right? This lecture is called Exotic Terranes. So I'm introducing you to some of the terranes. Mount Stewart is an exotic terrain. That big blob of granite is an exotic terrain. Why is it sitting next to serpentinite that's 60 million years older than it? Because the serpentinite is an exotic terrain too. Mount Stewart smashed onto the coast. The serpentinite smashed onto the coast. Right next to each other. Totally unrelated. All right. Next, let's go to the Rockies. Rocky Mountains. If you're a John Denver fan, Rocky Mountain High. I wouldn't expect any of you to be John Denver fans, but hey, has it ever struck you as odd that we've gone through this entire course and we haven't talked about the Rocky Mountains really? We brought it up a little bit when we were talking about how there's some uplift there and it exposed some craton in places, and we talked about it when we had a river starting high in the Rockies and turning into the Mississippi River, but somehow it didn't cut a deep canyon. Talked about how rivers sort sediment into different sizes, but we never talked about where they came from. Biggest mountain range in North America. We haven't even talked about it. Let's talk about it. How about some basic field observations from the Rocky Mountains? I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Rocky Mountains. Glacier National Park, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, through Montana, up into Canada. It's a big mountain range. So what do we have in the Rocky Mountains? Basic field observations. I'm a geologist. I show up to the Rocky Mountains. The first thing I notice, there's a lot of sedimentary rocks here. Layer after layer after layer of sedimentary rocks. Find some spots that look like it's more like the core of the mountain. We got metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks. Sedimentary rocks. If I look on the sides, both sides, we got anticlines and synclines. We got faults. Lots of faults. We got thrust faults, and I got reverse faults. What does that remind you of? A metamorphic core with folded sedimentary rocks and thrust faults and reverse faults. What do our folds and our reverse faults and our thrust faults come from? You already know. We're putting together pieces here. Crustal compression. We don't fold rocks when we're stretching them out. We fold them when we're squishing them together. What mountain range have we talked about that consists of a folded metamorphic and sedimentary core complex with lots of compression? Doesn't that sound like the Himalayas? Doesn't that sound like Mount Everest? There's not a volcanic rock to be found in the Rocky Mountains. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, there is not a volcanic rock to be found. Not active volcanic rocks like we get from our Cascade volcanoes, lahars and pyroclastic flows and tephra. Not a batholith like we get from the Sierra Nevadas in California, where there used to be composite cone volcanoes, but they've all gone away. By the way, that would be page 44 in your course pack. We never really talked about it, but take a look at it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Goes over briefly the formation of the Sierra Nevadas. None of that stuff. No lava flows like we have at Kilauea. In the Rockies, none of that. We got metamorphic, sedimentary, folded, reverse faulted, thrust faulted, compression, compression, compression. Doesn't that sound like a plate tectonic story to you? Doesn't that sound like a continental convergent plate boundary? Sure does to me. So is your brain starting to churn a little bit? Are you starting to think here, oh, so North America and some other continent collided, smashed together, pushed up the Rocky Mountains, and all this weird stuff that we got going on the West Coast, that's just all that other continent, right? Kind of, but not so fast. Not so fast. geologic evidence that the Rocky Mountains, that story of the Rocky Mountains, those folds, those thrust faults, those reverse faults were active from 90 million to 30 million years ago. There's even a name for it. Of course there's a name for it. The Laramide orogeny. Laramide orogeny. Orogeny sounds like a dirty word. It's not. It's a geologic word that means mountain building. The Laramide orogeny lasted for 60 million years, and it made the Rocky Mountains. Just a couple weeks ago, there was a big earthquake in Idaho. We got big earthquakes in Washington, Oregon, California. You ever heard of the big earthquake in Colorado? You ever heard of a big earthquake in Utah? They're pretty quiet earthquake-wise. And the reason for that is because the Laramide orogeny isn't happening anymore. The Laramide orogeny stopped 30 million years ago. The Rockies, something killed them off 30 million years ago. So there's another weird thing. We got big earthquakes in the Himalayas, but the Rockies, our biggest mountain range, there's not really any earthquakes. Okay, now it's time to start putting some pieces together. Hopefully I made it confusing enough for you that the back half of this thing will help put some pieces together and you're not bored already. The first thing that I'm hoping you're realizing right now is if the Rocky Mountains are somehow the suture point, they're the mountain range that got pushed up because of a continental plate boundary, convergent plate boundary. Hopefully we're realizing that North America used to be smaller. Today, if you want to go surfing, you go to California. But 90 million years ago, where do you go if you want to go surfing? You go to Salt Lake City. The edge of the North American craton, I'm going to fess up to a little bit of a lie here. You remember that beautifully simple diagram we made with our craton basement rock and our layers of sedimentary platform rock and our igneous stuff on the edges? I lied. It's a little too simple for us. But we have enough knowledge now to add to that. Everything west of the Rockies, or everything, check that, everything east of the Rockies, that's true. Go to Kansas, go to Oklahoma, flat, dig down deep enough, you got some craton. Nebraska, eastern Colorado. Go to the Rockies, you've got folded big mountain range, right? West of the Rockies, our craton platform picture's out the window. Anything west of the Rockies, we can't really talk about craton and platform anymore because there isn't really craton. The craton is the core of the continent, yes. If we go back 200 million years ago, the edge of the craton, as Pangea is splitting up, the edge of the craton is the edge of the continent. Today, everything west of the Rockies looks really weird. If you look at it on a geologic map, it's like a quilt. It's like a patchwork quilt. Think about a quilt that that your grandma might have made. She gathered up all the different scraps of different fabrics, and she sewed them all together into a patchwork. You might have a piece of corduroy next to a piece of denim. She got those fabrics at different times. They came from different places, and she stuck them all together into one blanket. That's Western North America. It's a big patchwork quilt. We're talking about how it assembled. Each patch in our patchwork quilt is a different terrain. It's a different chunk of land that came from somewhere else and smashed itself onto the edge of North America. They arrived one at a time. So, what's the other continent in our continental plate boundary that form the Rocky Mountains? It's all of those terrains smashed together. Eventually there's enough of them to start functioning like another continent and start pushing up those Rocky Mountains. So here's what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine a conveyor belt. We got a conveyor belt, like we're in a factory now. Go watch a Mr. Rogers episode where he takes you on a tour of some factory, and there's some conveyor belt. Little wheels in our conveyor belt. What's our conveyor belt? Our conveyor belt's moving this way. We're getting a little out there now. Here's North America. North America's heading west. There's our conveyor belt pushing stuff east. What is our conveyor belt? Started in a lecture a couple days ago. Our conveyor belt is the Farallon plate. And sitting on top of our conveyor belt are a bunch of bunch of big gumdrops, big blobs of land from other places. And as our conveyor belt goes, it carries those gumdrops, and as our conveyor belt goes around, it smashes those gumdrops onto the edge of North America. And that conveyor belt keeps going. 200 million years that conveyor belt's going. And everything sitting on it, as that oceanic crust dives down beneath North America, as that oceanic crust does that, everything on top gets scraped off and smashed onto the edge. Reminds you a little bit of the sediments from the Olympic Peninsula the other day. Same idea. And we'll get back to that tomorrow in our final lecture. Each one of those gumdrops on the conveyor belt is a different exotic terrain. It's a different piece of land from a different part of the world. All riding on this oceanic crust until eventually it smashes into the leading edge of North America. So, if you want to think about the craton, if you want to think about North America, what that looked like when this story starts, take a map and you draw a line from Edmonton, Canada, to Spokane, Washington, to Salt Lake City, to Las Vegas. That's about the edge of our craton. And as all these patches smash onto the edge of North America, our continent grows, our geology gets more confusing. if we have subduction that whole time, don't we have cascade volcanoes that whole time? The answer is yes. Yes, of course we do. Anytime you subduct ocean crust beneath continental crust, you're going to end up with composite cone volcanoes. And we have composite cone volcanoes. But as the coast of North America grows to the west, that means the ocean trench where the subduction is moves to the west. And as subduction moves to the west, our supply of magma moves to the west. So our modern day Cascade volcano story starts 40 million years ago, you remember. That's because before that, the volcanoes were further east. So why does our modern day Cascade volcano story start 40 million years ago? It's because the very last accreted terrain, accretion, we've talked about that word, accreted means stuck onto the edge. Our very last terrain joined us 50 million years ago. All right, that's it for this one. We got one more lecture. We're gonna put together a whole bunch of pieces. Actually, no, it's not it for this one. Hang on, I got a couple more minutes in here. If everything from BC to Mexico looks like a bunch of patchwork, can we see it all today? And the answer to that is, of course, no, we can't. These accreted terrains are still a really confusing story, and there's still a lot of good work being done on them by geologists today. There's a lot more to learn about them, where they came from, and so on. But it's hard because you can only see snippets of them. Why can you only see snippets of them? Well, because there's newer geology that obscures them. There's newer geology that covers them up. Remember our Columbia River basalt? Big cow pie of basalt in the middle of eastern Washington, 3 miles thick at Tri-Cities. Underneath all of that, we got dozens of accreted terrains, but we can't really look at them. We got, a little tidbit from a drill core here and a tidbit from a drill core there, but we can't go look at the rock outcrops. Same goes all the way down through Oregon, up into BC, southern Alaska. That's one of the things that keeps geology exciting, is that there are so many mysteries left to be solved, and there's so many stories left to be told. And we have to take little bits of evidence from here and from there. And sometimes if we get lucky, we can tie those bits of evidence together to tell a story. All right. This is it. We got one more of these things, and we're going to tell one of the biggest, most exciting stories, I think, of the whole semester. I'll see you then. Have a great day, guys.